welcome to the Top Self Podcast. My name is Shannon Bryant. I'm so excited for my guest today. I have none other than Jessica DaSilva, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist and attachment coach. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you so much, Shannon, for having me on here. I'm excited to be here and have another conversation with you.
Yeah, so good to see you again. I know a lot of things have changed and happened in your world, and you've got some exciting things starting. So we'll definitely talk about that at the end. If you want to talk
Sure.
about what you've got going on, we can certainly do that. I did want to start, although this audience is pretty familiar with attachment styles, we may have someone new. It's always good to get a refresher and to hear from you. What exactly is an attachment style?
Yeah. So, the way that I see it is the way in which we experience love and relationships. So I focus more on the realm of how we experience love, like partnership. But it really has to do, it translates into all types of relationships. So friendships, family dynamics, co-working dynamics. But it's really, so I'll explain it in the way that I teach it, but um, really how we experience love and bonding, right, to another, to someone that we have an emotional connection or dependency with.
Mhm.
And there's four different styles of the way in which we experience this love or experience relationships. And there's anxious attachment. I'm sure you guys have already heard of these, right? But there's the anxious attachment. There's dismissive avoidant attachment, fearful avoidant attachment, which was my attachment style for most of my life, and secure attachment style. And we're not fixed to any of these ways of experiencing love. We can definitely work on shifting it and becoming more secure. So that's really exciting. And that's kind of what I help my clients in doing.
Yeah, because I think that's everybody's biggest question when they hear the attachment styles, especially after they figure out which one they are and it's one of the insecure attachment styles. They go, "Oh, can I switch? Am I able to get to secure?" And the answer is yes, through someone like you to help them do that. So, and one, I wanted to say, me too on fearful avoidant. So I'm curious, do you mind sharing maybe where that attachment style came from for you before we start diving into
And
how we get to secure?
totally. So, and do you mean for the fearful avoidance specifically? Yeah.
For you
Uh,
specifically.
for me, 'cause yeah. So with my attachment style, it came from, so fearful avoidance often have both anxious and avoidant tendencies. And my fearful avoidant came from just more like macro levels of trauma. So there was some physical abuse with my caregivers, obviously a lot of emotional, verbal abuse. So my mom, wonderful woman, love her to death. However, she was also really scary. So coming from, like a Brazilian household, the disciplinary tactics that they take can be kind of scary and very enforcing in that way. And so I always saw my mom as like my source of safety, but also my source of fear. So I didn't know like when she would be in a good mood. I didn't know when she would get angry. It was very unpredictable. It was very inconsistent. She was a very emotional woman, right? Who didn't really know how to self soothe. So that kind of influenced the fearful avoidant attachment, where it was like, the anxious part of me longed for her and wanted that connection. But then there's the avoidant part of me that was like, ooh, that's too much. I can't tolerate that. I'm in danger, right? You want too much from me. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is a great, like, that's really how fearful avoidant shows up or can become, right? Like, I want the love and attention
Yeah.
because sometimes it's really good, but
Yeah.
then sometimes it can be scary, and it sounds like that's in your situation.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So then you kind of adopt this behavior, this very hot and cold behavior, a lot of ambivalence, a lot of disorganization, a lot of inner confliction and confusion, because there's these two parts of you, one that's longing for this connection and another piece that's like really afraid of it at the same time. So that
Yeah.
impacted my romantic relationships in the sense that I would also find people that were like that. I would sabotage in a lot of ways because I would show a lot of interest and then pull away. It was just so hot and cold, so confusing, so unpredictable, so inconsistent, and it just wasn't sustainable. It wasn't
Mhm.
healthy at all.
Yeah, yeah. And so what got you into this work? Is because a lot of times it does have to do with sort of, I have this problem of my own that I need to solve, but how did you get to be a licensed marriage and family therapist?
Yeah, I mean, it was really the upbringing, right? And just wanting to understand, why am I the way I am? Like, where is this coming from? Because I see my friends who are not acting the way I do. They're not as reactive like me. They seem to be more stable. They seem to be a little bit more put together emotionally. Like, why am I this way? So, because I didn't really have those role models growing up, my mom was also fearful avoidant. My dad was more dismissive. Um, I was like, "I'm gonna go to school, and I'm gonna learn about this because I know that there's a better way. I know that there's a different way of experiencing life and love." So I got my bachelor's in psychology, and that's where it all kinda started. Started learning about human behavior and was fascinated by it and how we all, just how humans function and, the way we think and our patterns and our habits. I thought it was fascinating. And then I went into marriage and family therapy specifically because my whole life has been like a learning lesson with love. I've just always been in relationships. So went into that, and that, I think it was through grad school, working with couples and working with individuals and really learning the tools, that I was able to see, okay, wait a second. If we can just shift our mindset, if we can learn these relationship skills, we can also become secure and healthy. Awesome. So that's kind of where it all happened.
Yeah. I completely understand that, and I think, a lot of times the people listening to this podcast are like, "Yeah, I see my friends." We have the same question when it comes to jealousy and insecurity in our relationships of going, "My friends aren't worried about this woman who is working with their husband or their boyfriend," or, "My friend doesn't mind if there's half-naked women on TV," but for some reason we do, and it's so hard to feel different. Nobody wants to feel like, "Oh, why can't I be like everyone else?" And so
Mhm.
that's where sometimes these attachment styles will come into play, right?
100%. And I've been seeing that a lot with my sister. So my sister's married. They have such a secure relationship, but she falls more avoidant, whereas I fall more anxious. And they'll just like outwardly talk about hot girls and hot guys. And me in the past, that would have been so triggering because I
Mhm.
fall more anxious. So for me, it's just more, oh, and we've talked about this on my podcast when you came on, but that's a huge threat. My partner saying that someone else is really attractive, to me, that's just very alarming. But for her, it doesn't really compute, it just doesn't really bother
Yeah.
her.
Yeah.
Um, so it's interesting to see how our attachment styles can kind of influence the way we perceive things. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, I fall more on the anxious side too. So let's just talk about the anxious attachment
Yeah.
style for real quick. Do you mind just sharing kind of a little bit of an overview on the anxious since we just talked about fearful avoidant?
Yeah. So anxious attachers generally need, a lot of closeness and connection and validation and reassurance in their relationships. But it becomes self-sabotaging when it becomes excessive, right? Because we can't depend always for these needs to get met by another person. We end up pushing them away. We end up becoming resentful, bitter, possessive, controlling, jealous. So we really have to learn how to find a healthy balance of meeting our needs ourselves and also meeting our needs for a partner in a realistic, balanced way, right? And then do you want me to talk about the avoidance or should we go anxious
Well, I
first?
had a question about the anxious attachment style real quick because I think I see this a lot, but especially it shows up when it comes to boundaries or what I've seen in terms of if someone who is an anxious person, maybe they're in a relationship with, whatever other attachment style, but that person sets a boundary or even not even something so strict, but like, "Oh, I I have laundry to do, so I can't come over again tonight. Or, hey, I'd love to come over, but I really have to study,
Mm,
or I've got an early morning, whatever that is. An anxious person, see them like almost feel offended by someone doing that because to them, they'd do anything to see that person. Can you talk about that a little bit? What's behind that?
yeah. So there's a couple things with that. Oftentimes, anxious attachments, and this is detrimental in a lot of ways. Anxious attachers often believe that the way that I give love is the way that others should give and express love too. So there's this kind of unrealistic expectation element to giving and receiving love because they're kind of seeing it from their experience and their perception and their ways of showing love versus this other unique human that experiences love very differently and maybe has very different needs or different ways of giving and receiving love. And so when someone isn't meeting that expectation, it's so disappointing. And
Right.
it might mean to them like, "Oh my god, I guess you don't love me because you're not showing love the way I show love. That must mean you don't love me. You don't care about me as much as I care about you."
Mhm.
Um, so there's that element, which is really big, and also anxious attachments, again, they're operating from these core belief systems around, "I'm not good enough," "I'm not lovable," "I'm not important enough for you." So
Mm.
if you're operating from those belief systems, anything that might indicate, like, disconnection or, not being included or, you know, canceling plans or whatever the situation is, it might trigger those belief systems, so it just changes your perception of the whole thing in a negative way.
Yeah, man, we definitely do it like, why can't they just do what I like,
Yeah.
why can't everybody think the way that I think and just do what I think is appropriate in this situation, right?
Yep, I had this conversation with my mom, Shannon, the other day. Falls very I mean, fearful avoidant, but, like, very anxious, and she's helping my sister out with a baby right now, so she's staying at their house, and she's like, I don't understand how your sister just doesn't know that I need a little bit of time when I get back from work. I just need a little bit of space." I'm like, "Mom, you need to communicate that to her. You can't expect her to just know that and then get upset that she's not addressing that with you. You need to communicate because not everyone, you know,
Thinks the
exper yeah,
same.
thinks the same as you or anticipates the same things as you." So
Yeah.
when it leads to that, like, resentment and bitterness and disappointment, you know that that's something you wanna address within yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. That story can be so strong too, like, "Oh, if you loved me, you would do this," or "You must not love me," like, that's the gauge for people. Yeah,
Yeah, so when
that's
I work
tough.
with couples, that's one of the biggest things that we touch on is, first of all, understanding that we all experience love differently. Right? You have very different needs, they have very different needs, but learning how to be proactive versus reactive. So the reactivity is I'm going to get angry, I'm going to be passive aggressive, I'm just going to hope that you catch on to how I'm feeling, but I'm not going to communicate it with you. Whereas proactivity is taking responsibility for your feelings and needs and just communicating it and teaching people how to love you, teaching people how to better treat you and support you.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, before we move on to dismissive avoidant, I have a question about that because you work with couples. And I'm curious, like, is there one thing that you see that shows up time and time again when couples are struggling? Like, is there something where if couples would just do this,
Yeah.
it would help their relationship? Is there something that stands out like that?
Yeah, I think that's really what it is. It's just stop anticipating them to know what your needs are
Mm.
and just communicate it. It doesn't mean that they don't love you. If you're communicating, because sometimes people have this idea that what if I communicate my needs and they just, they have to learn how to love me, do they really love me? And it's like,
Mm.
if they're willing to do these things for you, it's because they love you. Right?
Yeah.
And a lot of the times people can't or, they don't anticipate our needs or they can't for whatever reason. So, it's really just helping people understand that it's okay to communicate your needs And that if someone's willing to do that for you, then that's a beautiful sign that they love you and they're committed.
Thanks so much for that because, yeah, I remember the days of being like, well, if I have to tell them, then it's no good. If I have to tell them, then it doesn't mean as much. And that's definitely not the case, right? It's I may have to tell them and I may have to remind them even, but if they're doing it, what you're saying is that is showing that love.
Oh my gosh. 100%. Because if they don't, right, if they're not willing, if they're resistant, if they're defensive, then that just goes to show the health of the relationship, right? And the sense of like compatibility in the relationship. And that speaks volumes, right? Because maybe that's just not the right relationship for you and you're feeling resentful and all these things because you're with the wrong person.
Right.
But if you are vocal about your feelings and needs and they're open and receptive and nurturing and willing, I mean, how that's everything you can ask for, right?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned dismissive, so let's move to dismissive avoidant attachment style. Let's talk about that one.
Yeah. So dismissive avoidance and anxious attachments are often that's like the cliche dynamic, right?
Why do they fall in love all the time?
Yep.
What
For
is
several
that?
No, several reasons. So, okay, so I'll tell you a little bit about the avoidance. So, dismissive avoidant attachments, again, everyone's wired for attachment. So, it's not to say that like they don't want relationships. They don't really know how to operate within relationships. They have learned through their upbringing that it's safer to be alone. It's safer to just depend on myself. Can't really rely on my caregivers, so I just have to be resourceful, self-sufficient, and do things on my own. The thing is, as they get older, as they become an adult, they're operating from this very, like, self-centered place because they had to be. So they get into a relationship with someone who's more anxious because, "Wow, look at this person being so nurturing and giving and loving, all these things that I never experienced, but now I don't know how to maintain this. I
Mm,
don't know how to give this love back." And at some point, your anxious partner is gonna be like, "Hey, where's my love? Where's the return here?" And they just don't have those they don't have those tools, and a lot of them just don't have the willingness or the capacity to wanna do those things for their partner.
mm,
So you see a lot of, like, single avoidance in the dating
yeah.
realm, lot of avoidance out there.
Yeah. So that anxious person is just pouring into them because that's what they do to show, like, let me just dump all this love because
Ah,
that's how I
eh
show it. And
yeah,
then you're saying the dismissive avoidance, like, okay, I like it at first, but then whoa.
exact
And I don't know how to return this, which makes the anxious person even more anxious.
100%. Yeah, because when you look at the different stages of a relationship after that honeymoon stage and you're going to, like, the power struggle stage, that's often when you start communicating or you're more vocal about your needs. So when the anxious starts to become more vocal with their needs, that's when they see the avoidant kind of pulling away because now the avoidant is overwhelmed. Now the avoidant is being bombarded with these belief systems around, I'm going to let you down, I'm a disappointment. And that's usually what causes them to like withdraw even more. So you see a lot of conflict in that stage because of those
Yeah.
different needs.
So easy to see why those two might both
Yeah.
might get together, but then also why they would have so many problems in the relationship.
Yeah. So those are the couples that I usually see. It's always the avoidant and the anxious. Yeah.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so then anything we want to, because we touched a little bit on fearful avoidant because we were talking about your specific situation, but anything you want to share on that style specifically that maybe we didn't talk about?
Yeah. So with the fearful avoidant, it's like they have that desire for love and connection, but they're also afraid of it at the same time. Um, you see fearful avoidance. Usually it's like, I guess in my experience, it's always been like those roller coaster relationships where you have those like intense highs and intense lows. Um, you know, and so much of so much of, like, their wounding is around, betrayal, feeling like they're being
Mhm.
taken advantage of, and again, that often comes from just unhealthy relationship dynamics with their attachment figures and feeling like they couldn't really trust them.
Yeah, I see
Yeah,
a lot of fearful avoidance with the jealousy. I mean, that's like, of course, that betrayal wound is so big for them.
yep. Yeah, and we talked a lot about this too, but, that was huge for me, was the jealousy. That was such a big piece, and that would often be a reason why I would really sabotage my relationships was because I experienced so much jealousy. Any pretty girl, any girl that was, like, talented or cooler than me or smarter than me, it just felt like such a big threat to my relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a lot of people, I mean, we have a lot of people that go, I hear it a lot of like, I'm just gonna break up because I can't handle feeling this way. I'm driving my partner nuts, and so I'm out. I'm gonna just break up.
Yep. Yep. Yeah.
And
And
it's tough.
that's tough. That sucks if you feel as though, "Man, I have to just exit this relationship because it's
Yeah.
too overwhelming and too overbearing," but yeah, that's a real feeling, it's a real experience. I felt that way too, and I would often kind of, again, I would sabotage to the point where I would, like, push them away so that they didn't have
Mhm.
to be with me and have to deal with this.
Mhm. Yeah, and even I think some people will take it, not everyone, of course, but
Yeah.
even people will take it to the extremes of cheating in that relationship to even just like, I'm gonna sabotage it. I'm gonna, do something, or I'm gonna do something but to them before they do that to me, or to make it not hurt so much.
Exactly. Exactly.
A lot
Yeah,
of
so
unhealthy strategies for sure.
yeah, yeah. So it's fascinating, and I think that's why attachment science is so interesting and insightful because it helps you understand. Because a lot of the time you're like, "Wow, I'm just insane. I'm just messed up in the head." But
Yeah.
no, it's really because you learn these really unhealthy, maladaptive ways of relating and experiencing love. Um, and yeah, it's influencing your relationships currently. So I think kind of having that understanding takes away a lot of the shame that we
Mm.
experience. We realize, okay, wait, maybe I can do something about this. Maybe I'm not doomed forever. Like I can actually address these things in a healthy way.
Yeah, because it definitely, certainly feels that way. It's like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so much different than all my friends." When I try to
Mhm.
explain it to my friends, they don't get it. They are like, "What are what is your problem? What are you worried about?" And then it's just feeling like, as much as I wanna not be this way, I would convince myself every time we went out, like, "I'm not gonna get jealous this
Mhm.
time."
Mhm.
And, one little
Mhm.
thing, one cute blonde waitress, and
Yeah,
it's all over.
100%. Yeah. And I'm glad that you brought that up too, Shannon, because, when I work with clients too, a lot of the time there's this factor of, I guess I just have to it sucks that I have to do this extra work to stay stable and to stay, like, regulated.
Right?
And yeah, it does take a little bit extra effort for us, previous insecure attachers who are still kinda dealing with these things, to have to regulate ourselves and to have to stay aligned and, um, in a good headspace so that we're not so activated or triggered or reactive. Um,
Yeah.
does require some effort on our parts on a kinda consistent basis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think it's one of those things, yeah, you almost always really have to work on it to some degree. So we can definitely, and you're going to talk about this in just a second, hopefully share a couple tips with us of how we move into what everybody, feels like they want to be in that secure attachment style. But yeah, putting that work in and going, I have to do more work
Yeah.
than my friends, or this is where my piece is. But other people may have something else. There are people deal with so many things, but I get it. It's like, ugh, why do I have to do this work?
Yeah. Yeah. And it does get better. I'm sure you've experienced this with you too in your relationship. Like in the beginning, it might feel like we're doing a lot. And then eventually it just becomes more second nature to a sense. We realize, oh, wow, there's enough evidence here to prove that my partner is actually a good person and they're stable and they're secure,
Yeah.
So I think it's just the more evidence that we can create by doing these activities and practices, the easier it becomes, the more
Mhm.
reliable things
Yeah.
feel.
Yeah. Okay, so I know you have a great question that it's kind of your tagline question or what you ask, like, what would secure me do? Which I think
More.
is a fantastic question. It's something that we can all use and think about when we are in what maybe one of those situations where we feel triggered by something like, what would secure me do?
Yeah.
But I wanted to kind of say, well, what would being secure do for me? Can you talk about that a
Mhm.
little bit?
Yeah. So that I have a little mug here. What would secure me to?
It's so cute. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a daily reminder. It really
Yeah.
is. So, I always think it's important to create an environment that's nourishing and helpful in that way. But so this really came from, again, not having that blueprint or navigation system, and then just learning the mindset and learning the tools to align with my secure self. So, secure it's going to look different for everyone based on your set of values and your belief systems and, your needs. But it's always kind of just, secure you is always confident, you're right, self assured, compassionate, and flexible. So, those are like my go tos. But when I think of secure me, so you can always kind of gauge when you're acting from an insecure place where it's a bit more reactive
Right.
versus a secure place where it's proactive. So whenever I'm feeling triggered, I know what insecure me would do. Like we know what those self-sabotaging patterns are.
Yeah.
So in those moments, my tools and my go-to is always to regulate myself first and foremost. So like those deep breaths, right? Secure me is like, let me just check in. Let me take some deep breaths. I'll do like an anchoring technique, which is an NLP technique. And then I'll ask myself, what am I feeling right now? Always checking in with my feelings and needs. What am I feeling? What do I need right now to feel better? Um, Also, in those moments, it's challenging the insecurity. So, if for instance, it's, oh my God, my partner's checking out that girl. It must mean that he's interested in her, like he wants to be with her, right? I'll ask myself, and this comes from Byron Katie's work, but I'll ask myself, is that thought 100% true, Jessica? Can I absolutely know that my partner wants to be with that woman? Oftentimes, no, I can't absolutely know. And then I'll ask myself, if I could remove this thought from my consciousness right now, how would I experience this moment differently with my partner? Wow, I would just be more present. I'd be more present. Okay, cool. How do I want to approach? How can I align with my secure self right now in that moment? And then it usually comes from being more present, right? It comes from
Mhm.
maybe telling myself an affirmation. Hey, Jess, we're good. We're safe. So I think that main question there is if I can remove this thought from my experience right now, how would I approach this differently? And I think that question there really helps me see what is coming from insecurity versus what is coming from my secure self. Because I
Yeah.
see that I have control over my thoughts and my experiences. If I'm able to just remove it from my current reality, it goes to show that I have some control over it. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, so good. What a great question to be able to ask yourself in the moment because we do starting those stories that just kind of like, oh, let me just keep feeding this
Yeah.
because we may not have other tools that we know to bring into what we're experiencing. So, what a great question that we can ask. So good.
Yeah. And sometimes too, and it's not to say that like that's gonna work every time. Sometimes if something is still lingering, if a feeling is still lingering, if a worry is still lingering for more than a day or something, then I'll probably address it and I'll communicate my feelings and needs. But if that can work for me in the moment, that's always my go-to. So I always try to
Mhm.
meet need for validation or reassurance on my own by doing that. If I'm still feeling triggered, if I'm still feeling activated, then I will address it with whoever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so you had mentioned, like, what do I need right now? So what do I need in this moment? What do I need right now? Can you talk about how we figure that out a little bit? Because maybe I might not know what it is that I really need. Is there some sort of steps we can take to get down to what I need right now?
Yeah. So, David Rico talks about different types of needs, which I really appreciate. He wrote the book How to Be an Adult in Relationships, and he talks extensively about these relationship needs. But essentially, your feelings they're gonna guide you to your needs. Your feelings are indicating to you needs that are going met or unmet. So it's kind of a practice, but I like to use like a feelings wheel.
Mm,
And whenever I'm triggered, I'll look at the feelings wheel and I'll identify, okay, I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling angry right now. And then I'll ask myself, why am I feeling angry? Why am I feeling angry? And what do I need to feel better? So maybe it
mm,
is that I'm feeling angry because someone didn't respect my boundary, whatever boundary that was. What do I need? I need respect. I need consideration. I need thoughtfulness. Um, so then in those moments, I might communicate, and this comes from Nonviolent Communication, another really great book by Marshall Rosenberg. He talks about communicating your feelings and needs proactively in a way where you communicate, "Hey, this is what I'm feeling, this is why I'm feeling this way, and this is what I need from you, or this is what I would appreciate from you." It's always checking in, right? What am I feeling? Why am I feeling this way? What do I need to feel better? Sometimes I'll take initiative and try to meet the need myself, maybe through an affirmation or a mantra, or I'll read something or I'll Google something and that's enough. Other times I need to have the conversation
right.
with the person, and that's when I'll communicate in that form.
Yeah. And I like that communication piece because sometimes we don't want to be vulnerable. Like, I don't want to tell them that this is what I'm thinking, but then we do so many other things to because of it that can damage the relationship when it might have just been much easier to say, "Hey, here is what is going on. Here's the way I'm feeling. This is what I need from you in this moment." Because then we also a lot of times, I'm sure you see this being a family therapist, that we make people guess.
Yes.
Like my husband, I remember him being like, "Just tell me what it is. Just what is it? Because I can tell something's wrong. So what is it?"
Exactly, and that's the unrealistic expectation, right? That people should just know. They should just
No.
anticipate what I'm feeling and needing, and we really have to change our belief systems and our perception of that because that's really not healthy, and it's really just counterproductive to, the health of your relationship. Um,
Yeah.
the best approach to be proactive would be to, again, address it. Like, if it's not being met, if they're not anticipating, if they're not knowing that it's upsetting you and it's a lingering experience, just address it. That's you being proactive versus reactive. Yeah.
Yeah. So good. Well, I know you've got some things going on. Do you want to share what's going on in your world and how can people reach you?
Yeah, so I have my ongoing one-on-one attachment coaching, which is really beautiful. It's 10 weeks of working together, and I recently just launched my group coaching attachment program to help you really overcome those self-sabotaging attachment patterns. And that's a 3-month program, and we just opened it up. So there's, a handful of people in there right now, and we have our group coaching calls and our community platform, and it's a very interactive experience. It's been really fun. So that's
Yeah.
yeah, got that going on.
Well, and I think people love when they have someone else who is experiencing the same things. I mean, we talked about like people are like, this, I feel strange. I feel like I'm, not like everybody else when I'm experiencing some of these things.
Yeah, there's a lot of shame that goes into it. So when you have other people sharing their experiences, cheering you on, telling you that, oh my God, you can get past this, you can do this. I was just experiencing this the other day. You feel more supported. It's such a great way to meet your needs, right? It's not just
Mhm.
through your partner, but like you have a whole world, a whole support system to meet your needs as well.
Oh, love it.
Yeah.
Jessica, thank you so much for being on Top Self. You're amazing. Go check out Jessica's podcast. It's so good. Your podcast is wonderful. So thank you so much for doing it and helping people. It's called Let's Talk Attachments. So check out Jessica's podcast. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you so much, Shannon. Appreciate you.